From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio on the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. October 12, 1998 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Monday Night War ratings effect on Monday Night Football. UFC Woes, plus more. By Observer staff. The man who many, if not most, wrestling experts believe to be the greatest wrestler that has ever lived and many in his native country believe to be the greatest athlete alive has signed to take the plunge into the pro wrestling world according to a press conference on October 6 in Japan. Alexander the Experiment Karelin, the Russian Greco-Roman super heavyweight who has won an unprecedented 11 consecutive world championships, was announced by Ring's president Akira Maeda as being his opponent on a big show in mid-February, most likely at the Tokyo Dome. Karelin broke the record set by another legendary Russian freestyle super heavyweight Alexander Medved who wrestled in the 60s and early 70s and captured 10 world titles. According to Maeda, who called Karelin the toughest fighter in the world and compared his record and his credentials favorably to Rickson Gracie, he said he'd been trying to get Karelin early in the year but talks fell apart. He said they tried to make contact for Karelin to come to the show when Rings promoted on April 25 in Russia but it also didn't happen. He said they had continued to pursue Karelin through their Russian Rings contacts and that he had signed a contract for the match last week. The announcement was held off until just 5 days before the KRS Tokyo Dome show with Rickson Gracie vs Nobuhiko Takada, the timing of which certainly was no coincidence as it was an attempt for Maeda to steal the spotlight. Karelin, 31, captured Olympic gold medals in 1988, 1992 and 1996 along with every world championship since and in between, and is the favorite to make it 4 golds in 2000. He's been undefeated in wrestling since the 1987 World Championships where he as a 19-year-old lost to the eventual winner. He's been the top-rated super heavyweight in Greco-Roman on the national team since the age of 17, captured his first European championship at 18 in 1986, and since that time has won all 10 other European championship tournaments that he's entered. Many different pro wrestling companies, fighting organizations and several NFL football teams over the years have attempted to sign him, particularly after his second Olympic title where he looked like the most physically dominant athlete in the world as he destroyed everyone in competition, including WWF, New Japan, UFC and Rings. Rings has been talking the most seriously about it on and off for the past several months, as Maeda was looking for an opponent for a major retirement match. Maeda had his retirement show on July 20th in Yokohama, but at the time left the door open for one major match of this magnitude. In 1988, Karelin came to Japan and appeared in a New Japan ring for an exhibition during a pro wrestling card at Tokyo Sumo Hall throwing Hiroshi Hase around the ring. However, when the Soviets sent several former amateur champions into pro wrestling starting out at the first show ever at the Tokyo Dome, which from an official standpoint would have been the first Soviet athletes ever to go into Western professional sports, due to Russia's economic collapse, they kept Karelin off that team. Maeda's announcement is that rules would still be determined. He insisted the match would be a shoot, of course even if it won't be, and if it will be probably the first ever for Maeda. He has to say that. He said the rules haven't been determined but the match would be 2 5-minute rounds, which in Rings vernacular indicates it'll be a shoot, and if there is no submission or knockout, that they would go into another 5-minute overtime. While Karelin is the premier Greco-Roman wrestler in the world, and most would say the greatest ever, no matter what your specialty, when taken out of your specialty, you become only human. For example, if Karelin faced a world freestyle champion under freestyle rules, the odds are that he would lose because he's playing somebody else's game. Of course Maeda, 39, while a Hall of Fame pro wrestler, is not a world-class fighter in any way except for his contrived pro wrestling reputation and would be long since past his prime since he hasn't kept himself in shape even if he at one time had been. If and when this match actually takes place, Karelin would join a very small group of Olympic gold medalists in wrestling that went on to pro wrestling. Maeda put the knock on Gracie's contrived 400-0 claimed fighting record, noting that Karelin, who has more than 300 wins without a loss over the past 12 years and going against exclusively world-class competition, is legitimately the most impressive verifiable real record of any athlete in a combat type of sport. Kurt Angle, who signed in August with the World Wrestling Federation, who captured a gold in freestyle at 220 in the 1996 Games, is attempting to make pro wrestling a full-time career. Historically, the most successful of those was Henri de Glane, who captured a gold medal in 1924 representing France, and later migrated to Montreal where he was a headliner and captured a version of the world heavyweight title in the famed 1931 Battle of the Bite match, beating Strangler Lewis via DQ in Montreal, one of pro wrestling's most famous double-cross finishes in history. Danny Hodge would have been, however. He captured a very controversial silver medal in 1956 before becoming the dominant junior heavyweight in the pro wrestling world from 1960 to 1976, when he was forced to retire due to a broken neck from an auto accident. The list of other Olympic gold medalists that have turned to pro wrestling is short, among them being David Gogich, who captured 2 freestyle gold medals as a super heavyweight and did one pro wrestling match in Japan, losing via submission to Minoru Suzuki at the Tokyo Dome in 1990 for the Old Pro Wrestling Fujiwara Gumi promotion. Wilfried Dietrich of Germany, the 1960 gold medalist in Greco-Roman as a super heavyweight, who is legendary for being the only wrestler ever to medal in 5 different Olympics, 1956 to 1972. Best known in the US for his giving 420-pound Chris Taylor an overhead belly-to-belly suplex in Olympic competition in 1972, who went pro briefly in Europe for the Catch Wrestling Association in the late 70s and had a famous match with Antonio Inoki, and Americans Robin Reed, 134, and Russell Viss, 145, in 1924, and Pete Maringer, 191.5, in 1932, all of whom briefly tried pro wrestling in the US but were never major stars. Kevin Jackson in 1992, 181, Kenny Monday in 1988, 163, and Mark Schultz in 1984, 181, captured Olympic gold medals and all fought in either the UFC or Extreme Fighting in recent years. Both Raw and Nitro have garnered more mainstream publicity stemming from how the Monday Night Wrestling ratings war has affected the ratings for Monday Night Football. While not noted in many circles, the September 28 MNF game drew an 11.1 rating for the Detroit Lions vs. Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, which is the second lowest rating in the 29-year history of the show. A 1986 show which went head-to-head against the 7th game of the World Series that year did an 8.8. While the 2 pro wrestling shows certainly were a factor, an even bigger factor was the San Francisco Giants vs. Chicago Cubs baseball game on ESPN, WGN and KTVU, which drew an 8.1 rating on ESPN alone and a 9.3 rating overall within the cable universe and a 7.6 within the entire broadcast universe. We have a slight correction in the figures listed here last week since the ratings weren't officially available, but the actual numbers were Raw with a 4.67 rating, 4.39 first hour, 4.94 seconds hour, and 6.9 share to Nitro's 3.99 rating, 4.20 first hour, 3.90 seconds hour, 3.88 third hour, and 5.8 share. The actual combined head-to-head ratings was an 8.54 cable universe rating, or just slightly behind baseball. The Los Angeles Times noted on October 5 that among the reasons NFL ratings going into this past weekend were down 13% from a 14.9 to a 12.9 was the popularity of Monday Night Wrestling. It stated that more teenage boys watched pro wrestling on September 28 than football. It also noted that they are selling NWO replica t-shirts at New York Jets, Jet World Order, and Jacksonville Jaguar, Jaguar World Order, home games. The Hollywood Reporter got more specific with the same story, noting that on September 28 there were 966,000 boys 12 to 17 watching Raw, 683,000 watching the NFL, 503,000 watching Nitro, that's over the 3 hours as opposed to head-to-head 2, and just 196,000 watching the Giants-Cubs game. The most watched network non-sports show among teenage boys during that time frame was Everybody Loves Raymond with 363,000 viewers. Raw peaked with a 5.52 rating for the segment where Austin dove off the Zamboni and the backstage fracas, followed by Undertaker and Kane destroying McMahon's ankle. Nitro ending 3 minutes early because of the screw-up gave Raw 9 unopposed minutes that it most likely would have lost, as in the 12 minutes before Nitro went off. Nitro, Hogan vs. Hart and Hogan vs. Sting, did a 5.15 rating, while Raw Shamrock vs. Mankind vs. Rock did a 3.85 for the 12 minutes, and with the 3 unopposed minutes wound up with a 4.28 quarter and a 6.1 overrun. Had everything stayed as it was going and had Nitro gone off the air the same time as Raw, the margin would have closed most likely to a 4.56 to 4.10 for the night, which is still a sizable win. Raw won 6 of the 8 quarters, including a 4.2 to 3.8 win when Raw presented Outlaws vs. Southern Justice and Owen Hart vs. Dan Severn, while Nitro featured Chavo Guerrero Jr. vs. Disco Inferno and the brief 4 Horsemen / Bischoff angle. Nitro's other quarter win was by a 4.0 to 3.9 margin with the Jericho Goldberg angle and DDP interview opposing Vader vs. Al Snow. In the demos for the head-to-head 2 hours, Nitro maintained a slight edge in males 25 to 54 and 55 plus but got routed 426,000 to 255,000 among males 18 to 24, an age group Nitro has owned. Raw, which generally trails greatly among women, also won women 25 to 54 and even 18 to 24 handily, an age group WCW usually more than doubles WWF in, along with solidly winning kids and drawing more than double the number of teenagers as WCW. An interesting note regarding September 21st, when Raw won by the 4.0 to 3.9 rating is as we've mentioned before, the ratings are determined by the percentage of homes with television sets in the US that have the sets tuned to the particular show. Nitro traditionally draws more viewers per set, so when the overall difference of a Raw win is 0.2 or less, Nitro most likely actually had more viewers, which also relates to October 5th because of the closeness of the night, but at press time we don't have total viewer numbers. For September 21st, Nitro actually did have more viewers, 4,306,500 to 4,301,600, although in the head-to-head 2 hours Raw did win as the Nitro average against Raw was 4,086,300. On October 5th, Raw did a 4.549 rating, 4.52 first hour, 4.59 seconds hour, and a 6.82 share. Nitro did a 4.546 rating, 4.81 first hour, 4.34 seconds hour, 4.49 third hour, and a 6.80 share. Over the head-to-head 124 minutes, the Nitro average was a 4.42, so it appears to be one of those nights where more people watch Nitro but that Raw won the ratings. Exact viewer numbers won't be available until after press time, but based on the usual breakdown, one would expect the total viewers going head-to-head to be expected to be around 4,872,700 for Nitro and 4,882,800 for Raw, or a slight win in that comparison for Raw, but considering all 3 hours of Nitro, the total average audience would be expected to be 5,015,800. The point being, over the last 3 weeks, even though Raw had more viewers head-to-head each week, it's close enough to where Nitro can legitimately claim to have had more viewers overall 2 of the past 3 weeks. Basically, the momentum in Raw's favor isn't nearly as much as it seems to be. Monday Night Football, matching 2 undefeated teams, did its biggest rating of the season with a 17.0. On October 5th, each side took 4 of the 8 head-to-head quarters while Nitro won the overrun. Raw's biggest advantage came in the 5th quarter with a 5.32, Shamrock vs. Kane, Venus vs. Gangrel, to a 3.87, Hogan and Bischoff interview. It should be noted that was the point in the show where Jim Ross was talking about Raw has action in the ring, no 45-year-olds dueling on the mic. Nitro's biggest edge was in the overrun with a 5.44, Sting vs. Hart backstage brawl, to a 4.49, Undertaker vs. Maivia. By quarters, Nitro won 4.6, Wolfpack vs. Bando backstage brawl, Garza vs. Damien, to 4.1, X-Pac vs. Brown McMahon in hospital bed. Raw took a 4.8, Bangers vs. ICP, McMahon and Mankind in hospital, to 4.0, beginning of Psychosis vs. Kidman. Raw did a 5.0, Vader vs. Mero, to 4.0, ending of Psychosis vs. Kidman, Warrior interview. Nitro did a 4.8, Steiners and Bagwell angle with Judy Bagwell, Rick Steiner vs. Adams, to 4.4, Hart interview, beginning of Shamrock vs. Kane. Raw did a 5.3, Shamrock vs. Kane, Venus vs. Gangrel, to 3.9, Hogan interview. Raw did a 4.58, Jarrett vs. Snow, to 4.55, Page vs. Canyon. Nitro did a 4.7, Disciple vs. Lane, Hogan and Bischoff interview, Nash attacking Hall, Bischoff and Arn, to 4.2, Road Dogg vs. Henry. Nitro did another 4.7, Horseman angle with Bischoff, beginning of Sting Hart brawl, to 4.4, Austin attacks McMahon, Undertaker vs. Maivia beginning, before the overrun, which featured the conclusion of both headline matches. The 2 most important shows of the year in the free fighting genre will be taking place October 11th in Tokyo and October 16th in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the KRS Pride 4 show and UFC Brazil respectively. The former may spell the end of the road as a serious headliner for one of the biggest pro wrestling stars of this era. The latter, many suspect, may spell the end of the road for a company that revolutionized the world of martial arts, certainly helped change the world of pro wrestling, particularly overseas, and was responsible in bringing the 2 worlds closer together. In both cases, the shows only underscore the problems this industry is having and just how difficult it is to maintain this type of a sport financially. It was only 3 years ago when the 4 UFC events of the year averaged a 1.01 buy rate, numbers even more impressive when you consider that WWF averaged in 0.75 and WCW in 0.63 during the same year. Since that time, the fall of UFC, which at the time was unquestionably the show in that sport and many believed at the time was going to, without any television, surpass worked pro wrestling and challenge boxing for pay-per-view supremacy, the latter many believe was its downfall, has been well documented. In some ways, at least financially speaking, as certainly not for fight quality, UFC has been replaced as the big show by KRS, an oft-criticized promotion that after 3 tries over the last year has yet to put on a good show, and since the first show has had problems drawing, but because its pay scale is considerably higher as its promoters for whatever reason, many believe unsavory, aren't nearly as concerned over the bottom line, has been able to pull many of the most marketable heavyweights away from UFC. However, while KRS has proven it has the resources to pay big money to fighters, it has yet to prove it can make money promoting the sport, nor has it been able to put on one show that hasn't been a disappointment. Between holding matches in a wrestling ring as opposed to an enclosed cage environment not being as conducive to good matches and having longer time limits which have resulted in some marathon boring matches, 2 of which lasted more than 40 minutes, they have since amended the rules to where matches have 3 10-minute rounds and if no decision is rendered, an additional 10-minute overtime, which means a total of a 40-minute time limit. In trying to largely attract pro wrestling fans, it has also promoted several worked matches on its shows, mainly involving pro wrestlers Takada, who was given a win on the last show to build up this main event, and Koji Kyo. Many of the rival shoot groups, whether they be Pancrase and Shudo in Japan or UFC in the United States, have privately, and often not so privately, decried KRS entrance into the market because of the belief they are paying the top fighters more than they are worth from a marketing standpoint and thus make it difficult for any of the aforementioned groups to keep its most marketable fights and maintain good business relations with the ones they've been able to keep when word gets around how much some of the top fighters who have limited if any drawing power such as Mark Kerr and Marco Ruiz are earning once they've left UFC for Japan. The situation with Boss Rutten is typical. Rutten was the top foreign fighter in Pancrase once Ken Shamrock left the promotion in 1996. He took a hiatus from the promotion to heal up and move to the more lucrative shows with less rules. Rutten picked exposure over short-term money in being convinced by UFC booker John Peretti to sign, figuring that in the long run, winning that group's heavyweight title would be worth more than the short-term higher money offer from KRS. However, when Semaphore Entertainment Group lost Randy Couture when economic dictated they had to cut back everyone's money, Rutten, who was asked to fight for less than he'd been contracted to as well, also pulled out. Rutten originally took the September 14th Pancrase pay-per-view fight largely as a tune-up for his UFC title match, but at this point it appears he has his eye on KRS, and in fact, challenged Rickson Gracie twice in recent months, on the most recent KRS, where he was in Kerr's corner, and Pancrase pay-per-view shows. KRS put itself on the map promotionally last year when it signed the Rickson Gracie vs. Nobuhiko Tada match for the Tokyo Dome. The match had its own backstory that was a shoot that led to the match being a natural as far as drawing big money but not a natural for other reasons, the main one being Takada had a great reputation that needed protecting as the believed to be world's greatest fighter, at least to his loyal pro wrestling fans. On December 7, 1994, Yoji Anjo, at the time a pro wrestler for Takada's since deceased UWFI promotion, showed up unannounced at Gracie's Jiu-Jitsu school in Santa Monica, California with Japanese photographers and former Japanese wrestler Shinji Sasaki in hand, and issued a challenge on the spot. Gracie was at home while Anjo was creating this scene, got a phone call, literally drove to his gym while taping up his hands, and gave Anjo a horrible beating. There was clamor from Japanese wrestling fans for Takada as the top star in the stable of a supposed shoot group which was at the time selling out almost every show to challenge Gracie for revenge. The reality was known at the time that Takada would have no chance in such a situation, so Takada never addressed it. By not addressing it, it led to the many Takada pro wrestling fans. Takada may have been at the time the biggest drawing card in pro wrestling and certainly by any standard from 1990 to 96 was not only one of the biggest draws but also one of the best workers in the entire business, wondering why. Not only did Takada lose a great deal of popularity by his ignoring the issue, but fans lost confidence in the UWFI fighters as being the real deal when none stepped forward to publicly attempt to avenge Anjo. Ironically, at about the same time, another UWFI fighter, Dan Severn, who UWFI basically told not to enter UFC, ignored their wishes, made himself a name in that game, and while it could have brought back prestige to UWFI, the end result turned out to be Severn never working for the group again. UWFI, for both the aforementioned incident and also due to outside business problems, by late 1995 had one foot in the promotional grave, basically was saved by New Japan, which turned the interpromotional feud into the biggest money feuds, at least up until that point in time, in pro wrestling history, with Takada selling out 3 consecutive Tokyo Domes in 7 months. But that feud was booked by New Japan more for short-term ego gratification than long-term business. They were the ones in charge, and they were the ones going over in no uncertain terms, and you thought that mentality was strictly American. And when UWFI was used up, the company had little life left and folded. At this point, Takada was taking indie pro wrestling gigs at $27,000 per shot, but was quickly outliving his marketability with that kind of a price tag, including taking a ridiculous match against Abdullah the Butcher, and when he and Giant Baba failed to come to terms. The only avenue left for big money was the match left on the table. The problem was that, in a pro wrestling vernacular, Gracie wouldn't do business. He wouldn't lose. He wouldn't even carry Takada for 1 round before trying to beat him in their match, which was postponed several times before finally taking place on October 11, 1997 in the Dome. Of course, the build-up for the Gracie-Takada was far more interesting than the match itself, which Gracie won in 4:33 with an armbar submission in a match that Takada didn't get one offensive move in on before a crowd estimated between 35,000 and 37,000, believed to be 98% pro wrestling fans. The entire match, from the moment Takada, who was paid $180,000 for the slaughter, began walking to the ring to the ending of the show, was like the last of the Takada marks witnessing the athletic funeral of their one-time hero, who was as aware of what was happening as anyone. Being exposed as not only not being the greatest shooter, but not even being competitive against a smaller man. If this was pro wrestling, the thing to do would be to have Takada try to save face, challenge for a rematch, train all year, and count the money for the rematch, just as Antonio Inoki would have done in the same situation, except Inoki wouldn't have ever been foolish enough to be in the same situation. From a promotional standpoint, this show is not without some flair. KRS has been promoting the show for months, 1 year to the day of their first meeting, same time, same building, same participants. At first, it appeared the legend of the first match, which some would say from a historical standpoint was one of the most important pro wrestling matches of this generation. Takada was without question the biggest pro wrestling name ever to do a legit shoot, and from at least a legend standpoint, nobody is bigger than the Gracies when it comes to fighting, proved to make it something more than it really was, and would make a rematch even bigger than their first meeting. Perhaps people would buy a rematch and believe that, like in his pro wrestling days, that the few matches Takada lost after being a headliner to the likes of perceived tough monsters Vader and Gary Albright, he always came back and avenged. But in recent months it appears nobody is really believing it. While Takada deserves praise in that 2 of his students, Hiromitsu Kanehara, now of Rings, and Kazushi Sakuraba, are world-class in their weight, the truth is that Takada, 36, was in training regularly, tapping out to near beginners at the famed Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu Club where he was training under Ruiz. Ruiz himself said that Takada had no chance at all against Gracie and ripped on Takada as far as being a true fighter, going so far as to call him a wimp. No doubt Gracie, whose age is listed at 38, turns 39 next month, but other sources claim he's actually 40, who had built up a reputation as the world's greatest fighter long before almost anyone in the US had ever even heard of his younger brother, although the reality is he's been totally untested since this sport even existed on a worldwide basis, will be asked once again before the fight to do the right thing for business. Most likely once again, he'll refuse, although there were rumors floating around Japan in the days before the match that were shocking in that regard. There was even discussion about another plan, which may have had some credence if only because last year Takada's people themselves agreed to do UFC provided Ken Shamrock would be his opponent, no doubt looking for a big-name pro wrestler with a legit reputation in Japan to rehabilitate him, and then just days after the deal was put together, pulled out of the match claiming an injury in some circles, and professing to know nothing about the match in the first place in other circles. Perhaps Takada in the last days before the show could come up with another injury, and the Japanese promoters, figuring just about the only person in Japan with the marketability to take his place on such a major show would be Masakatsu Funaki, would slide him as a replacement. However, if there was going to be anything to that, it fell apart when Funaki was knocked out by Semischult on September 14th. The end result, unless Gracie gives in to the outside pressure, at that point will be a formality. Realistically, just like any pro wrestling match, this one will be decided beforehand, because no decision beforehand is basically a win for Gracie. To the pro wrestling fans who once idolized Takada, they had their hearts broken when he tapped out to Keiji Muto, when he even got involved in that farce with Abby, and when he couldn't do a thing against Gracie. If this event draws, it'll be wrestling fans that support it. But will wrestling fans support the Emperor of Shoot-style pro wrestling after it's been revealed he isn't wearing any clothes one more time? In another part of the world, UFC will struggle clinging barely to existence on October 16 in the 8,500-seat Ginásio de Portuguesa in São Paulo, Brazil, in a show available on pay-per-view in the US primarily to Dish owners. As with most of the recent shows, the lineup has some intriguing and competitive matches on paper. But more important than good matches at this point is if Semaphore Entertainment Group will be able to swing a deal where Brazilian TV station Globosport will make a long-term commitment to the end and Brazil will become its home away from home. For American pay-per-view purposes, the main event is Frank Shamrock 4-1 versus John LeBay 3-1 for the middleweight title. However, in marketing the show in Brazil for the live television special, they were building the show around Vitor Belfort, who they'll attempt to market as a national hero, against Jerry Bollander, a match that won't be taking place due to Bollander blowing out his knee last week training for the match. The result of all this is that Belfort, 5-1, will instead face Vanderlei da Silva of Brazil, 8-1, a dangerous 22-year-old who in his last match on August 23 knocked out world-class wrestler Mike Van Arsdale in 4 minutes, whose only loss came in a match stopped due to cuts. Da Silva, who Belfort isn't crazy about having to face to the point some feel he may change his mind and try and back out, is a national Muay Thai champion who has looked impressive in Vale Tudo outings in Brazil, with his lone drawback being he's been cut often, leading one to believe this match will wind up being a stand-up war. Originally, after Bollander was injured, Belfort's opponent was set to be Ronnie Roberts, a 22-year-old from Modesto, California who has a 3-0 MMA record. However, that fell apart within a matter of days when Roberts broke his hand in training. The idea of this show is to pit the two winners, hopefully for UFC being Shamrock and Belfort, into a match that if it were to take place would almost surely be the biggest match of 1999. LeBay can't be discounted out since he beat Shamrock in their previous meeting, although despite that win most have him as a pretty heavy underdog once again. Shamrock's only MMA loss was on a split decision in January 1997 in Honolulu after a brutal 30 minutes match which saw both men exhausted at the finish, which included Shamrock knocking some of LeBay's teeth out and LeBay dislocating Shamrock's jaw, the repercussions of which has turned it into a very legitimate grudge match, as neither is happy about how the first match ended. Since that time, Shamrock has won 7 matches in a row in a variety of styles, including wins over Olympic wrestlers in his weight class, 1992 gold medalist Kevin Jackson, and many-time national Greco-Roman champion Dan Henderson, and over previously unbeaten Extreme Fighting champion Igor Zinoviev, all 3 in less than 50 seconds. Along with 2 top Japanese heavyweights, Shudo heavyweight champion Anson Inoue and ring star Tsuyoshi Kosaka, in matches he was giving up considerable weight. LeBay, since beating Shamrock, has struggled, having his shin bone broken in a pancrase match in December against Ryushi Yanagisawa, and since coming back has lost pancrase rules matches to Minoru Suzuki and Joe Pardo. The remainder of the UFC show has Tank Abbott, 8-6, facing undefeated Pedro Rizzo, 4-0, primarily a kickboxer, who is the top protege of Ruas Kosaka, 1-0, facing Lions Den fighter Pete Williams, 4-0, who is coming off a big win over Mark Coleman in an intriguing matchup. Williams has the edge standing up, particularly with a greater reach and more experience. Kosaka is better on the ground, however Williams' Lions Den training should make getting him in a submission very difficult. Kosaka has a major edge in experience as well. Pat Miletic, 21-2, faces Mikey Burnett, 1-0, for the new UFC lightweight, under 170, title. Burnett, a member of Lions Den, has fearsome punching power, very good wrestling ability and incredible, nearly freakish strength for his size. However, he's only had 1 MMA fight, although in it he knocked silly famed Brazilian Eugenio Tadeu. Miletic is a good all-around fighter with far more experience with 23 fights, and his only loss was due to a broken nose, but has been training on a very bad elbow suffered in surviving against much larger Severn for a time-limit draw in a match with no judges on August 23. The other top match has Jeremy Horn, 9-3-3, who went an unheralded and was ahead on points before submitting to Shamrock in a title match on the last show, facing Brazilian Ebenezer Fontes Perca, 6-3, whose record includes losses to former NCAA champion Kevin Randleman and a decision loss to Dan Severn. To MMA fans, the Takada Gracie match is considered a bad joke, most of whom don't understand the realities of business and that if Takada wasn't there, the promotion wouldn't be there either. There are a few intriguing matches on the show for the serious fans. Igor Vachenchin, 22-1, the Soviet knockout artist who has won tournaments in Russia, Brazil and Israel and has destroyed some much larger world-class wrestlers in a matter of seconds, faces former UFC star Gary Goodridge, 9-6, of Canada in a match that promises to be a slugfest. Kerr, 9-0, who has the best record of any heavyweight in the world, faces Brazilian luta livre myth Hugo Duarte, 5-1, the latter looking to avenge his very controversial quick loss to Abbott on the last UFC. Sakuraba, 3-0, faces Alan Goes, 3-1, in the match with the most interest among insiders. And Ruiz, 7-1, faces much smaller pro wrestler Alexander Otska of Battlerts. Japanese television rundown. September 19th, New Japan. 1. Jushin Liger pinned Great Sasuke to retain the IWGP title in 1713. The last 10 minutes aired on television. This stemmed from the Osaka Dome where Sasuke pinned Liger in a non-title match. It was better than you'd think from these two and a noticeable improvement from the previous match. Sasuke did his running flip dive crashing onto the guardrail. It's a wonder he has any knees left at this point. Liger suplexed him over the top rope and he took the bump all the way on his back. Liger gave him a hard power bomb on the floor. While Liger was waiting for him to recover, he started doing jumping jacks in the ring a la Love Machine. Liger delivered a release German suplex and Sasuke started grabbing his shoulder as a sell, followed by a brainbuster and a running Liger bomb. Big pop for the kickout. Sasuke came back and went for a Frankensteiner off the top but Liger hooked the ropes and Sasuke landed on his head. Liger came off the top but was met with a dropkick and fell out of the ring. Sasuke did his patented Osai moonsault spot where he destroys himself on the guardrail. After a K-Brata in the ring, Sasuke got a near fall with a German suplex. He ducked a palm blow, Shota, and hit a Frankensteiner, and the two traded near falls with quick cradles back and forth until Liger finally hit the palm, then a running palm. Liger set him up for a super fisherman buster but Sasuke reversed in midair and landed on top for a near fall. Sasuke hit a somersault sending off the top for a near fall. The next move was really weird. Sasuke went for a moonsault apparently expecting Liger to move. Liger didn't move and Sasuke landed with what basically appeared to be a leg drop to the back. Sasuke still sold it as a miss. Liger hit the palm and grabbed an armbar in the middle for the submission. After the match, Tiger Mask and Naohiro Hoshikawa attacked Liger, but El Samurai and Kendo Kashin saved. Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto got involved and at first sided with New Japan against the Michinoku Pro guys, but before long Otani and Kashin were kicking at each other. 4 stars. 2. Otani and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa won a non-title match over Kashin and Kanemoto in 12:31. Only the last 3:30 aired. The wrestling was good, but it was basically all story. Kanemoto accidentally kicked Kashin once, and accidentally dropkicked him a second time. Otani then had Kanemoto pinned after his springboard dropkick but Kashin saved Kanemoto, but then delivered a neckbreaker, turning on him. Otani then pinned Kanemoto with a dragon suplex. 3. Bryan Adams and NWO Sting beat Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata in 13:08. Only the last 3 minutes aired. It was slightly below average. Adams is far more effective in Japan because he's so big, not diluted by having a whole bunch of guys his size around at which point he becomes just another big guy who isn't any good. Not saying he's any good. Finish saw Sting use the Stinger Splash and Scorpion Death Drop on Hirata. 4. Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan beat Scott Norton and Michael Wallstreet in 7:07. This match was basically to build some heat for the Norton-Chono match that never took place due to Chono's injury. Wallstreet, with his beard, t-shirt and pants, looks like a much taller version of Tommy Dreamer. Norton played semi-monster although he bumped for Chono's Yakuza kick. Finish saw Chono make Wallstreet submit to the STF. After the match, Chono and Norton did a stare down until the entire NWO pulled them apart. 1 1/4 stars. 5. In a tag team tournament match, Kensuke Sasaki and Yuji Nagata beat Keiji Muto and Hiro Saito in 13:45. Most of the match had Nagata versus Muto and it was good, although since this show was taped on the opening night of the tour, the fans were not at this point accepting Nagata as a main eventer even though he works well. Sasaki and Saito were kept as bit players in the match but neither looked good. Finish saw Nagata pin Saito after a belly-to-belly superplex and a bridging back suplex. Fans weren't ready for this as a finish yet as Nagata wasn't over yet although less than 2 weeks later he was. 2 3/4 stars. September 20th All Japan. This was the TV show to elevate Yoshinari Ogawa to star status. First they aired an edited tape of the Korakuen Hall match where Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako lost to Ogawa and Toshiaki Kawada and Takao Omori. They mainly focused on spots with Akiyama versus Ogawa to build up their singles match, ending with a big upset when Ogawa pinned Akiyama after a jawbreaker and a cross-legged folding press to a big pop. 1. Akiyama pinned Ogawa in 11:10. It started out hot with the crowd into Ogawa as the new star and getting some nearly near falls. They showed many shots of Misawa watching the match from the back. The match was slow in the first half, but picked up and turned into a pretty good match. Akiyama did his Blue Thunder, a move that starts as a back suplex but is turned into a forward power bomb. Ogawa got all sorts of near falls, including blocking an exploder into an inside cradle which popped the crowd big, and the same spot from the tag match with the jawbreaker and folding press. Akiyama came back and scored the pin after 2 exploders, 3¼ stars. September 26, New Japan. 1. Liger and Samurai beat Atani and Takaiwa in a non-title match in 15:35. The last 6 minutes aired. The match had already picked up to where it had great heat when TV started, and it was excellent when Liger was in with Atani. It was a bit off when Samurai was in with Takaiwa, although Takaiwa shows great fire. Takaiwa did the double bomb into a Death Valley driver, but Liger saved Samurai. When Takaiwa tried a Death Valley driver off the top, Samurai maneuvered it into a swinging, reverse DDT, which sounds better than it actually was. At least they realized that and set the spot up again, and this time the spot was awesome for the pin. Samurai grabbed one of the tag title belts after the match and was doing an interview with the belt when Riki Choshu just walked up and took the belt from him. 3¾ stars. 2. Muto and Norton and NWO Sting beat Manabu Nakanishi and Hirata and Tatsumi Fujinami in 12:36. The last 6:30 aired. Muto was real good and worked one great sequence where he and Fujinami traded dragon screws. Most of the match seemed like a Nitro match that went nowhere. At one point Fujinami came off the top with a bombs away knee drop on Norton, who basically got right up to no-sell lariat spots. Norton didn't sell a suplex and came back to powerbomb Hirata. The last few minutes were okay. 1¼ stars. 3. Sasaki and Nagata beat Tenryu and Koshinaka in 14:56 of a tag tourney match. The last 8:30 aired. Some of the match was great, in particular a few standing exchanges with Tenryu and Nagata. In other parts it was actually embarrassing, including a spot where Sasaki was supposed to take an enzujiri from Tenryu on the apron as he came into the ropes. He knew it, but Tenryu forgot. Sasaki just stood there and then Tenryu did the enzujiri and everyone picked up on it. The match actually fell apart for a small period before it started getting great heat as Nagata kept kicking out of pins. The last few minutes were very good, ending when Nagata pinned Koshinaka for the first time with a bridging back suplex. 2½ stars. 4. Hashimoto and Kazuo Yamazaki beat Chono and Tenzan in 23:54 in the match to determine who went to the tag tourney finals. The last 13:30 aired. Most of the match consisted of Chono and Tenzan stomping on Hashimoto, and then Yamazaki. Everything was fine, but nothing was that special either. It picked up toward the finish when Hashimoto hot tagged in and kicked the hell out of both guys. It ended with Yamazaki using a knee bar on Tenzan for the submission finish. This was the match where Chono wound up with his neck totally destroyed, and it probably happened early on, although he didn't show overt signs of it, as he didn't do much and appeared to be hurt. 2¾ stars. Mexico. Pimpinela Escarlata captured the IWC heavyweight title from La Parca in the main event of a big show on September 14 in Nuevo Laredo before a sellout crowd estimated at between 13,000 and 16,000. For those of you into really weird trivia, this would appear to make Pimpinela the first wrestler playing a gay gimmick, and the gimmick is a shoot to capture a version of the world heavyweight title. Parca, who is probably more than anyone else the top draw in Nuevo Laredo, which is the hottest pro wrestling city in North America right now, had to drop the title since he's basically given word that due to his WCW contract that he can't wrestle in Mexico any longer. They had a match with the belt 15 feet above the ring and was described as the best match of the year in that city, going over 40 minutes. The finish saw both men bloody, collapsing on the mat. Pirata Morgan, Dr. Wagner Jr. and Bestia Salvaje all hit the ring with a ladder. Zorro Mascara Sagrada, Triple-A version, and Minis Octagonchito and Super Muñequita then hit the ring, so you had a 9-way brawl while Parca and Pimpi were doing ladder match spots until they were both knocked out again. The original Mohicanoa then came out of the stands and hit the ring, handing Pimpi a Pepsi bottle, which he cracked on Parca's head. Bottle didn't break, but Parca was bleeding bad from the back of his head, then climbed the ladder and got the belt. El Hijo del Santo is now out of action, apparently needing rest after legitimately being so banged up. With most of the top Mexican draws out of the country with WCW, Santo is the most in-demand wrestler in the country. On October 4, Santo notified all promoters in Mexico that he's too injured to wrestle. His claim is, and this part is basically an angle, is he injured his shoulder and back in a mask versus mask match on September 27 in Juarez, beating Gisela del Ring, upping his record to 52-0 with his mask at stake. I guess he ought to challenge De La Hoya, Gracie, Goldberg and Karelin and put his mask up, and they are claiming he suffered an ankle injury on October 2 at Arena Mexico while submitting to the Scorpion Deathlock of Bestia Salvaje, probably as an angle to heat up a Santo versus Salvaje feud. However, for October 9 at Arena Mexico, they are advertising Santo and Negro Casas and Atlantis versus Pierroth Jr. and Scorpio Jr. and Bestia Salvaje as the main event, although are saying that Santo will only wrestle if he obtains medical clearance, plus Emilio Charles Jr. and Headhunters versus Boricua and Ricky Santana and Gran Marquez Jr. The Brazo de Plata heart attack story from last week was just another one-night angle, and as ghoulish as this sounds, being that he's had 2 good heart attacks and is only 35. He works heart attacks for comedy spots as part of his basic repertoire. Radamés Coco's October 24 pay-per-view lineup billed as the War of the Nations at the 30,000-seat Palacio de los Deportes in Mexico City was announced as Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Cien Caras and Tinieblas Jr. and Pierroth Jr. versus Headhunters and Salomon Grundy and Fabuloso Blondie in what is billed as Mexico versus USA, in what looks to be the among the worst pay-per-view main events in history, plus 3 Mexico versus Japan tag matches with Negro Casas and Scorpio Jr. versus Yoshihiro Tajiri and Magnum Tokyo, Atlantis and Brazo de Oro versus Mitsunobu Kikuzawa and Nozawa, Felino and Fuerza Guerrera versus Tsubasa and Fujin, Villano Tercero and Brazo de Plata and Original Mascara Sagrada and Tinieblas Sr. versus Born Killer and Tigre Canadiense, Mike Lazansky, and American Destroyer and Heartbreaker. Killer is billed as Canadian and Destroyer and Heartbreaker as American, and I'd guess all may have worked of late in Puerto Rico. And Mascara Magica and Super Astro and Tormenta Star versus La Morgue and Guerrero del Futuro and Archangel. And for a spectacular, the lineup is underwhelming. The storyline theme of the show is that Mexican rudos and technicos have to forget their differences and fight for the country against the foreign teams, which is why natural enemies like Scorpio and Casas, Atlantis and Pierroth and Fuerza and Felino are teaming. Casas hasn't been at Arena Mexico the past 2 weeks because he's wrestling in Panama. TV announcer Dr. Alfonso Morales has been named the new editor of Box y Lucha. Archangel beat Torero on September 25 in Acapulco to win the Mexican national welterweight title. Torero appears to be fading from the scene as he's spending most of his time running his restaurant in Mexico City. Cien Caras pinned Rayo in a trios match on September 29 at Arena Coliseo, and then challenged Rayo for his CMLL heavyweight title. Super Luchas ripped again on poor Villano Cuatro, claiming that by wrestling without the mask in WCW last year that he shamed his father and his brothers. The magazine also ripped on the DF Commission for not suspending ref Babe Richard after he attacked their reporter. They also had a listing of the 6 most in-demand wrestlers in the country by independent promoters, claiming in order they are Santo, Conan, Vampiro, Pero Aguayo, Cien Caras, and Negro Casas. The Conan name is interesting only because he hasn't even appeared on TV in Mexico in close to 1 year and hasn't worked any house shows in Mexico in recent memory. Ovaciones reported that not only was EMLL finishing up Santana and Boricua, but also said they were finishing up Headhunters all after the October 11 Arena Coliseo show. October 2 at Arena Mexico saw Fuerza Guerrera and Bestia Salvaje and Scorpio Jr. over Santo and Felino and La Fiera when Salvaje made Santo submit in the 3rd fall. Santo did a stretcher job, and as they were taking him off on the stretcher, the heels in a final humiliation unmasked him. The main event saw Pierroth Jr.'s first match back teaming with Mascara Año 2000 and Apollo Dantes to beat Emilio Charles Jr. and Atlantis and Rayo when Pierroth Jr. kicked Rayo low and pinned him. The show didn't draw well, being built around Pierroth's return. Mr. Niebla beat Magnum Tokyo to win the IWRG middleweight title on October 4 in Naucalpan. Apparently there is major heat between EMLL and Niebla for continuing to work on indie shows even though he needs the knee operation. CMLL on October 9 in Tijuana has Mil Mascaras and Lizmark Sr. and Rayo Jr. versus Cien Caras and Universo 2000 and Morgan on top. All Japan. The new tour opened on October 3 before a disappointing crowd of 2,400 at Kawasaki City Gym. The main theme at this point is to get Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa over as a tag team. They beat Toshiaki Kawada and Masao Inoue when Ogawa did his new finishing combination of a jawbreaker and a figure 4 into a jackknife cradle on Inoue. At the TV taping on October 4 at Korakuen Hall, they beat Akira Tao and Tamon Honda when Ogawa actually scored the pin on Tao, which I guess is an example of Misawa's booking. The main event on the show was the first attempt at a new Misawa-style angle as Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama and Kentaro Shiga beat Gary Albright and Yoshihiro Takayama and Masahito Kakihara. However, there was a spot where Takayama, I can't believe they're going to try and push him again, knocked out Kobashi, and he and Kakihara claimed the only reason he didn't beat Kobashi is because of the All Japan biased referees. On the October 6 show in Niigata, before a disappointing crowd of 2,150, Niigata is Baba's hometown and All Japan has traditionally packed a 3,700-seat gym for years, saw Kobashi team with Jinsei Shinzaki for the first time and Akiyama to beat Misawa and Ogawa and Takao Mori when Kobashi pinned Misawa after 2 lariats. Traditional All Japan booking would mean, since Kobashi scored the pin against the challenger before the title match in a tag match, that Misawa is going to win the title, which is exactly what they did on the previous tour with Tao. We'll see. Also, Honda and Jun Izumida captured the All-Asian Tag Team titles from Johnny Smith and Wolf Hockfield when Izumida pinned Smith after a diving headbutt in 23-11. New Japan. Antonio Inoki's UFO promotion held a press conference on October 7 to announce its rules and its October 24 Sumo Hall card. It appears the rules are similar to the defunct Kingdom Group, where the wrestlers will wear UFC-style gloves and do a shoot style, perhaps even with some shoot matches, although one would presume most of the matches, not all, will be worked. The ring will be too hard to take bumps, although the style wouldn't allow for bumps anyway. No pinfalls. Matches can only end with a submission, knockout, ref or doctor stop, or throwing in the towel. Half the body has to be under the ropes to constitute a rope break, which can save a foe from a submission hold. 3 knockdowns ends the fight. Headbutts are legal, but low blows, attacking the eyes and attacking the fingers or toes are illegal. Some matches will be fought with rounds and some won't. The first lineup has Don Frye vs Naoya Ogawa, Brian Johnston vs Gerard Gordeau, first UFC finalist and has done worked pro wrestling for the old UWF, New Japan and Rings, Joe Charles, former UFC, vs Mark Hall, UFC and Kingdom, Orlando Vite, UFC/Kingdom, versus Jason Blaze, Satoru Sayama in a new Tiger Mask outfit versus X. Inoki and Sayama wanted to be Kendo Kashin, but New Japan has a big show the same night in Fukuoka and Kashin is in a junior tag team title match on the show. Igor Mindert, New Japan former Russian wrestler, versus Tom Glanville, Extreme Fighting. Kazunari Murakami, Extreme Fighting/KRS, versus X. Kevin Carr versus Modi Horenstein, UFC/Kingdom/Shidokan Karate Champion, and the Michinoku Pro version of Tiger Mask versus Ikuto Hidaka, Big Japan/Michinoku Pro. Don't know how they'll draw with a lineup like that, although perhaps they'll get a big house the first time out just based on curiosity. The main theme for the next tour, which opens October 9, is that Keiji Muto and Hiroyoshi Tenzan will be trying to recruit Yuji Nagata into joining the NWO. Masahiro Chono held a press conference basically stating that is the plan. Chono also said that he's in great pain and the doctor told him to stay out for 3 or 4 more months, but that he's planning on returning for the tag team tournament in late November. War will be running a major show on December 11 at Tokyo Komazawa Olympic Park Gym, and Genichiro Tenryu stated that he wants to defend his J1 Rikidozan belt on the show against Shinya Hashimoto. Apparently there is truth to the story about Osamu Nishimura having a health problem and being out of action, but we're unclear as to what the actual problem is. Other Japan notes. Jaguar Yokota, Rimi Yokota, 37, will have her final match on December 26 at Tokyo Ariake Coliseum as part of the interpromotional show that Japanese TBS will be carrying as their experiment to see if women's wrestling can be primetime television fare once again. Her opponent will be decided in a fans balloting, so there is a good chance of the first ever meeting of Yokota versus Manami Toyota as the main event. There are many, me not being one of them, although in the pre-1985 era I'd agree, that believe Yokota is the greatest woman wrestler of all time. Anyway, she's for certain top 3 or 4. She was revolutionary in her heyday, debuting at the age of 15 in 1977, winning the WWWA title at the age of 19 on February 25, 1981 from Jackie Sato, losing and regaining the title against La Galactica in 1983 and vacating the title when she retired for the first time at the end of 1985. She remained in retirement until the Tokyo Dome show on November 20, 1994, and after working some big shows for AJW, left to become one of the top stars, along with Linus Asuka and Bison Kimura, when the JD promotion formed. Battlers drew a sellout 2,000 on October 5 at Korakuen Hall to see Bob Backlund's return to Japan after being gone for something like 8 or 9 years. Backlund, who was over huge as a babyface doing all his late 70s spots that fans remember when he teamed and feuded with Antonio Inoki, beat Daisuke Ikeda in the first round of the B Cup tournament. Other tournament matches saw Yuki Ishikawa over Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Hisakatsu Oya over Greg Valentine. Backlund will return for a big show in November at Sumo Hall, which will feature the semifinals and finals of the tournament and see a Backlund vs. Great Sasuke match. Actually, Sasuke himself is doing an angle where he's now drinking and smoking a la Sandman or Scott Hall, but unlike in the US where it's all tolerated, he was fired by the promotion. No word on whether or not his New Japan dates in October are affected, but word has it that his October 9th New Japan date is cancelled, but he's still being advertised for the October 18th New Japan show in Kobe. Pancrase ran on October 4th at Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2050 with Jason Godse destroying Kenga Watanabe in 128, nailing him with many palm blows and bloodying him up, and putting him away with a choke. While Watanabe, who is the focal point of the promotion, was expected to lose to the more experienced foreigner, he was supposed to put up a great fight in doing so. An Osaka TV station was filming a documentary on Watanabe going from being a rugby star into Pancrase, which finished with the Godse match and aired early this week. Travis Fulton of Extreme Challenge debuted on the show, going to a 13-minute draw with Ikuizumi Noah. We had several reports saying it was an excellent show. Pancrase is making another rules amendment allowing seconds to verbally coach from ringside. Seconds are allowed at ringside under the old rules but weren't allowed to yell instructions as the fight was in progress. Esther Moreno is headed into Urgent for singles match with Asia Kong on October 7th at Korakuen Hall. Urgent will be opening up its tag team tournament on October 7th with Michiko Amukai and Yumi Fukawa, Tiger Dream. Candy Akutsu is the women's version of Tiger Mask, and Ayako Hamada, Mikiko Futagami, and Lady Metal, Reggie, and Jessie Bennett, Mary, and Fabi Apache, Ri Tamada and Hiromi Yagi and Mika Akino and Mariko Yoshida. JD will be promoting a series of inter-promotional matches on November 10th at Korakuen Hall billed as the third Junior All-Star Wars, headlined by JD's Sumi Sakai and Yugo Kasugi challenging AJW's Momoe Nakanishi and Nani Takahashi for the All Japan Tag titles. Big Japan is doing a junior heavyweight tournament from October 15th to November 6th with Ryuji Yamakawa, Masayoshi Motegi, Katsumi Yujuda, Tomoaki Honma, Minoru Fujita, Ikuto Hidaka, Fantastique, and Yukinojo Ichigo. Shadow WX Satoru Shiga, who captured the Deathmatch Championship from Matsunaga in the Alligator match deal last week, will make his first defense of the title on October 31st in Sapporo against the winner of the October 15th Narita match between Genesu Kobayashi S. Tomoaki Honma. Atsushi Onita is claiming he's going to start his new Uso promotion in December to crown the best street fighter in the world and issued a challenge to former rival Tarzan Goto. After Great Pogo beat Mr. Pogo last week, Mr. Pogo lost the Pogo name and is back to his old ring name of Gasaku Goshigawara. Hayabusa retained his independent world heavyweight and world brass knucks belts, beating Koji Nakagawa in the October 6th Korakuen Hall main event. After the match, Hiromichi Fuyuki challenged Hayabusa, and that title match will be the co-feature to Onita vs. Great Pogo on the November 20th pay-per-view show from Yokohama Bunka Gym. Full has a show on October 21st in Kawasaki headlined by Doskars vs. Giant Doskars, Kenji Takano, in a mask vs. mask match, and they'll also run October 22nd at Korakuen Hall for the Toyonobori Memorial Show. All Japan Women are planning a November 29th show at Yokohama Arena as the company 30th anniversary show, and we're trying to put together Manami Toyota vs. Kyoko Inoue as the main event, but Inoue said she won't do the show because AJW owes her so much money from when she formerly worked for them. Inoue will be fighting a male lighter weight Muay Thai kickboxer named Palin Yarjai Busabar from Thailand, who is 17 years old and got a ton of TV pub earlier this year in Japan when he appeared on the last Shootboxing Big Show because he looks facially like a woman on the November 14th Shootboxing Big Show at Budokan Hall. It's a total promotional stunt as Inoue's Neo Ladies promotion is in a lot of trouble and she figures this kind of freak show publicity if she wins, and it's a Vale Tudo rules match and the kickboxer is much smaller and has no wrestling experience, that it may get her over more to the general public and save her company. Weekly Fight claimed that Terry Funk only was paid half of what he was promised for working the recent IWA Great Kabuki Retirement Week, and that Funk is now attempting to get back into FMW. Here and there. The NWA 50th Anniversary Weekend, which includes a wrestling show, a fan convention, a Cauliflower Alley Club banquet, and even seminars for the various NWA promoters to trade ideas on October 24th in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, will include Jim Cornette, Yokozuna, the Butcher, Missy Hyatt, Stevie Richards, Todd Gordon, Doug Gilbert, Barry Windham, Tully Blanchard, Dan Severn, Harley Race, Killer Kowalski, and Fred Blassie. This is not specifically a Dennis Coralluzzo promotion but an event in which all the different NWA promoters from around North America will be co-promoting, each sending in their own talent under the proviso that anyone sent in has to do whatever finish they are given as a way to get the different smaller promotions to open up working relations with each other. Blassie has been added to the list of those being honored. Jim Ross will be presenting an award to Gordon Soley. Scorpio will replace Al Snow on the card in a cage match with Hot Stuff International, Richards and Scorpio and Pit Bulls and Gordon versus Gilbert and Lance Diamond and Steve Corino and Rick Ratchet and Coralluzzo. The WWF initially cancelled Dan Severn appearing due to the angle they are running with him, but have changed their mind as they are bringing him back to TV earlier than originally planned, so he'll be working against doctor's orders. NWA President Howard Brody did try and work an angle with ECW, but the sides couldn't come to an agreement. Brody offered them a Severn vs. Shane Douglas title versus title match on a pay-per-view, with Douglas going over on the proviso that Douglas dropped the strap back 3 months later, although that wouldn't have to be on an ECW pay-per-view. If you think about history, it's almost hard to stop laughing about that one. Brody's feeling is that the heat isn't between ECW and NWA, it's ECW and Coralluzzo, and although Coralluzzo was against working with ECW, he wanted to open relations. Heyman asked for them to strip Severn of the title and have Brody present Taz as the new NWA champion, which would replace the FTW belt and give it some sort of legitimacy, whatever that means, so the planned March pay-per-view match against Douglas would be title versus title, which Brody turned down. The October 3rd Memphis TV show included some WWF talent as they ran the Big House show later that night at the Mid-South Coliseum. The show opened with Billy Travis, Tom Pritchard, Road Warrior Hawk and Giant Silva coming out of a limo. Travis challenged Sid Vicious to a match at the Coliseum. Pritchard did an interview saying he hated Lawler and that Silva would take his crown on television. Hawk said that he and Animal were still having problems. Animal isn't fully recovered from his recent knee surgery but is expected back somewhere between October 8th and October 12th, so he brought in a short-haired, much larger version of Bart Gunn as his partner. Gunn talked about knocking out Jim Ross, Boy Steve Williams and everyone else, and said he'd do the same to Sid if he showed up. Even though the deal was that Sid was going to have to win 4 matches at the Coliseum to get a job with the promotion, on TV they were already advertising him for later spot shows. Hales wouldn't let Sid in the building, claiming that he had so many stars in town that there was no time for Sid. Sid was in the back beating up security, and chokeslammed Ashley Hudson into the bed of a pickup truck and whipped Tony Falk with his lifting belt. Outside the building, Sid said he'd beat all 4 guys, which he did, win the Battle Royal, which he did, and by winning the Royal would be Lawler's partner against Hawk and Gunn in the main event, which was a no contest, and Lawler said with Sid as a partner he liked his odds. Streak pinned Pritchard, but after the match Silva and Pritchard beat up Streak. Lawler no contest Silva in a match where Lawler did a good job of carrying Silva. Stacy attacked Hales. Baxter helped Stacy. Lawler threw fire at Silva. Hawk and Gunn beat up Lawler, and finally Streak opened the door of the building to Sid, who came in and cleaned house to end the show. Luthez 82 worked as a guest referee on an indie show on October 1st in Richmond, Virginia for a match between Craig Pittman and Barry Windham. A few changes to the USWF show on October 24th in Amarillo. The main event for the heavyweight title will be Evan Tanner versus former UWFI pro wrestler Gene Leidick, replacing Larry Parker. Music City's first anniversary show took place on October 3rd in Nashville before 450 fans. In the top bouts, Robert Gibson faced the Tennessee Volunteers by himself when Jason Gibson no-showed, but Al Snow interfered, helping Gibson to the win. Colorado Kid faced the winner of a Battle Royal earlier in the week, which was won by Bill Behrens, the owner of the company who plays a TV role as heel promoter. Where have we seen that one before? That match on September 29th saw 2 guys left and Behrens jumped in the ring and started yelling at both of them for not fighting harder, and they got tangled up and went over together, so it was declared Behrens had won and thus had to face Kid. Behrens did a people's elbow before getting beat. Main event saw Snow versus Flash Flanagan go about 20 minutes before the Vols attacked Snow and Flanagan saved him to set up a tag match on October 10th. Northeast Wrestling on October 4th in Terryville, Connecticut drew 1,275 fans in a match where Sid Vicious beat John Diamond to win the group's vacant title and Jake Roberts pinned King Kong Bundy. Sid's foe was scheduled to be new champ Bam Bam Bigelow, but they announced Bigelow had taken a job as Vince McMahon's new bodyguard and McMahon pulled him from doing the show, and that he was stripped of the title. In actuality, he was working ECW and he isn't going to WWF. Chris Condito and Tammy Sitch were also advertised on the show, but both were in Georgia for ECW as well. Peach State Wrestling on October 15th in LaGrange, GA is doing a benefit show for Richard Wade, the husband of Joyce Grable, who piled up heavy medical bills after suffering a heart attack and has lost 50% function of his brain. All the wrestling are working the show free and all the gate goes to Wade's fund. Randy Rose, Masked Superstar Bill Eadie, and local icon Sheet Donovan headline in a three-way, plus appearing on the card will be 75-year-old Mae Young and 60s female midget Diamond Lil. Rocky Maivia will be appearing at the RF Video Store at the Franklin Mills Mall in Philadelphia on October 11th from noon 2 p.m. In the Jackal's Pro Wrestling column in the Winnipeg Sun this past week, it told of the story of when Bad News Allen backed down Andre the Giant while in Japan. According to the story, Allen, who won a bronze medal in the 1976 Olympics in judo and no doubt was one of the toughest men in the world, was sleeping in the tour bus when he sort of heard Andre tell a racial joke. Allen woke up and told Andre to keep his racist remarks to himself. Andre told him to take a flying leap. Allen took off his earrings and, according to the story, Hulk Hogan, on the same bus, dove under his seat thinking Allen was going for a gun, figuring that nobody would challenge Andre to a fight without a weapon. Allen told the driver to stop the bus and challenged Andre to go outside, which Andre didn't. He challenged him to another fight the next morning in the hotel lobby, and Andre simply apologized for his remarks and promised not to tell any more racial jokes in front of him. Ringside Wrestling is looking for wrestlers 220 pounds or less to work as junior heavyweights. Please send photos and resumes to Ringside Wrestling, care of Scott Dupre, 23 Cross Road, Westminster, Massachusetts 01473. Empire Pro Wrestling on October 17th in Parker, Arizona, at the Parker Theater Club showroom. Good to report that former wrestler and current Monster Factory Wrestling School owner and WWE promoter Larry Sharp, Larry Wallace, leukemia is in remission. The Wellington Evening Post, the national newspaper in New Zealand, ran a story on Steve Rickard, a longtime local wrestling star and promoter. All Pro Wrestling has shows October 9th in San Jose, California at Mount Pleasant High, Max Justice vs. Vic Grimes plus Christopher Daniels vs. Suicide Kid, October 10th at the Gym in Hayward, October 17th in North Highlands, California and November 7th in Pinole, California. Franz Schumann turned heel for CWA in Hanover, Germany in a chain match against Tony St. Clair. Schumann has been one of the top faces for the group dating back to 1986 and is the current middleweight champion. Cannonball Grizzly won the group's Iron Man gimmick match tournament. NWA New England on October 17th in Melrose, Massachusetts at the middle school has Kevin Sullivan, Barry Windham, and Bundy. Emily Dole, who wrestled some in Japan and also years ago with the Glow Women's promotion as the Huge Samoan Mount Fuji, was one of 7 family members awarded more than $1 million in a $24 million judgment against the Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies during a raid of a bridal shower in 1989. Deputies in riot gear came to the family home in Cerritos, California, after a call about people fighting in the street with knives and sticks. The deputies in their report claimed when they showed up, they were hit with rocks and bottles. However, a neighbor had videotaped the entire scene and there was no evidence of such. 36 people at the party, including 2 elderly men and 1 pregnant woman, were arrested and beaten. 3 were eventually put on trial for rioting and acquitted. MMA. Jeff Blatnick's Mixed Martial Arts Council, MMAC, completed its 15-page UFC rule book on October 6, put together by Blatnick and Joe Silva. They will provide an official top 5 ranking in each weight class. The idea is to get all the promoters and not just UFC to join the council and make it a real national governing body of the entire sport like doesn't exist in either boxing, pro wrestling or kickboxing, including mandatory expulsion of promoters who don't pay purses within 7 working days after an event. The rules specifically don't allow matches to take place in a boxing/pro wrestling ring, and they must be in an area surrounded by a barrier no less than 5.5 feet tall. Refusing to take a drug test will result in a suspension of at least 3 events and a forfeiture of 25% of the purse for the event. Judges are not allowed to rule a match a draw as they have to pick a winner. Illegal moves are biting, attacking the eyes, striking to the throat, fish hooking, hair pulling, head butting, elbows to the back of head or neck, pressure point strikes, groin attacks, small joint manipulation, kicking a downed opponent, spitting, holding onto the fence to stall, faking an injury, unwillingness to fight, throwing the opponent over the top of the cage and outside interference from the corner. First foul will mandate a $500 fine, second another $500 and third a $1,000 fine and an automatic DQ. There can be 1 non-penalized warning given on a foul. ECW. Negotiations with War in New York have fallen through, so ECW isn't close at this point to getting a New York TV outlet, which will hurt with a pay-per-view coming and New York being not only the largest market, but an ECW target market. Weekend saw shows on October 3rd in Dalton, Georgia before 1,475 and October 4th in Marietta, Georgia before 2,311. Crowd enthusiasm was really high, which made both shows real good, and it was a different crowd than the Northeast regulars, as they were more into face versus heel and wrestling, and there didn't appear to be the somewhat prevalent element at the Northeast arenas that are there largely for blood and little else. The Dalton show was a TV taping which opened with Justin Credible versus Balls Mahoney. Axel Rotten at ringside attacked Jason, but Credible hit him in the stomach. Remember, Rotten has legit internal problems with a cane, so Rotten was coughing up blood, angle, before Tommy Dreamer made the save. This set up a singles match later in the show, which wound up as an 8-man when New Jack and Cronus and Spike Dudley helped Dreamer, while Jack Victory, Rod Price and One Man Gang helped Credible, ending when Spike pinned Gang after giving him the acid drop onto a ladder. Gang is into work every city once against Spike and put him over as the Giant Killer, but there are no long-term plans for him. Fans were really into the Jerry Lynn vs. Mikey Whipwreck matches both nights. Masato Tanaka vs. Bubba Ray Dudley ended up with Shane Douglas triple threat attacking Tanaka, and Taz Threat evened it up. There was an angle done where Chris Condito and Tammy Fitch got into a brawl with Lance Storm and Tammy Lynn Bitch, which wound up in the heel bitch stripped to her bra and panties. The main event saw Sabu and Rob Van Dam keep the tag titles, beating Douglas and Bam Bam Bigelow in about 5 minutes when Taz choked out Douglas and he was pinned. The match was kept short because it's pretty clear Douglas is nowhere near ready. Tracy Smothers, who has worked in the South most of his career, did a great job underneath at getting the crowd going. In Marietta, New Jack dove off the same balcony he dove off at the pay-per-view with an elbow drop in the same singles match that turned into an 8-man from the night before. The pay-per-view show was officially switched to the Uno Lakefront Arena. The only matches finalized at this point are the Triple Threat versus Triple Threat, Masato Tanaka versus Justin Credible, and Lance Storm versus Jerry Lynn. There will be something involving Dreamer versus Victory in either a singles or a tag, but the scaffold match idea appears to have been dropped. Despite stories to the contrary, neither Terry Funk nor Vader are signed for the card, although Paul Heyman does have an interest in both of them appearing. Mike Awesome is getting reconstructive surgery on both knees and was in Atlanta saying he'd be out of action about 9 months. Condito, Fitch, Van Dam and Credible have all reportedly signed 5-year contracts. Kevin Northcutt, a friend of Gang's, and Sammy Solo, a friend of Van Dam's, both worked in Marietta. Northcutt didn't look good. Solo was totally green but appeared to have a martial arts background and came off as a great athlete who didn't know how to do pro wrestling. In Marietta, when Bubba Ray Dudley challenged the fans to get in the ring, they threw everything that wasn't nailed down at him, and the scene was said to be worse than ever at WCW events. In the next match, when Sabu did one of his chair spots, the slippery chair from all the garbage thrown messed up a spot that could have been really dangerous. On TV, ECW did a unique send-off to Sandman, making a big deal about it and not burying him at all and really praising him, although it was really just an angle to set up Credible as being the jerk who ruins the farewell and transfers the heat to him as a top heel. Stephen Prozik of the Wrestling Observer Hotline was offered a job being the regular interviewer on the ECW TV show, and there is a good chance he'll start in late November after his wedding at the end of the month. WCW. This week's Scott Hall arrest was on October 1st outside a strip club in Orlando, Florida called the Diamond Mine, where he allegedly scratched up a $65,000 white limo with his keys, which explains the angle on Nitro where they destroyed the limo, making a 7-foot-long scratch, doing $2,000 worth of damage. Allegedly, while Hall was doing this, the driver was still in the car and called the police. Hall was arrested on third-degree assault charges and taken to jail, where he was released on $500 bail. The humor in this has long since ceased being funny. Despite reports to the contrary, Rick Rude is not suffering from cancer. Rude had a cyst removed on his testicles and had to spend 8 or 9 days in the hospital. The situation with the Giant, as everything has shaken out, is that he returned at Nitro on October 5th and was seen momentarily as part of the backstage brawl. He was claiming to not even know where all the rumors of his leaving got started, although at the last house show he worked in Fairfax, Virginia, after being injured after the match, he said backstage to the other wrestlers he was sick of things and sick of Hogan holding him down, and he was leaving for WWF, where he had a $1 million per year offer on the table. At the time, everyone thought it was just a ploy to get a raise from Eric Bischoff, but when he wasn't at Nitro on September 28th, his friends were telling people he was gone. The belief is that he got friends to start the rumors because basically everyone in the company by the end of the week believed he was gone to WWF, to the point it was even reported as fact on WCW's own hotline. There are some who believe he's saying is a double work and he's really leaving. Either way, he's celebrated by no showing the Saturday night tapings the next night. WWF sources that would know totally denied there were any negotiations, although indicated they would be interested in him if he was available. Somehow my feeling is if he were to go there, he'd have to greatly adjust his lifestyle because the WWF is pretty much keeping Shawn Michaels home nowadays because nobody wants to be around him until he gets his ego under control, and with all potential giant, had to be one of the great attractions of this era. He's hardly the proven commodity Michaels is, and unless he gets himself in shape and shows some interest in improving, he never will be. Referee Mark Shooter Curtis, Brian Hildebrand, was scheduled for arthroscopic surgery on his stomach on October 7th, as he's been unable to keep food down and his weight has dropped from 135 to 120. Curtis, who suffered from stomach cancer within the past year, is under the impression that it's either scar tissue from the original surgery forming a blockage of his intestine, or that in the chemo and radiation that part of his intestine was fried and it needs to be removed. He's expected out of action about 6 weeks. Villano Quattro, who came back too early from the neck injury on Nitro on September 21st from taking a mistimed double-team move by Raven and Canyon on the trapdoor, was said to be in really great pain over the weekend and was scheduled for an MRI on his neck on October 6th. Nitro on October 5th in Columbia, South Carolina drew a sellout 8,782, paying $156,060. Fans live hated the show and were booing heavily at the end. The show opened with the laughter. While the laughter is part of a cross-promotion for the Bride of Chucky movie, there is more to it than that. Perry Saturn pinned Lizmark Jr. with the Death Valley Driver in 2:27. Ernest Miller beat Kaz Hayashi in 2:35 with a kick to the chest. After the match, Sonny Wanu, who has been managing Hayashi for all of 2 weeks, dumped him for Miller, no doubt so Wanu can be part of the upcoming Jackie Chan angle. All they need to do is add Ed Leslie as a bodyguard and they'll have a trifecta of total incompetence for Chan to play with. Juventud Guerrera pinned Jerry Flynn after a juvie driver in 3:07. This visually looked ridiculous because Flynn had 10 inches in height and 85 pounds, but Flynn did a great job and juvie is one of the best in the game right now, so they had a great short match. This was a rare occasion when something like this works, and not just because the small guy won, but because the big guy worked the match to not make the small guy look like a small guy. Wrath pinned Villano V with the meltdown in 2:15. They worked together better than you'd think given the size and style differences. Wrath really got over doing a leapfrog, which popped the crowd and differentiated him from all the other big slugs in the company, similar to how Bruiser Brody made himself different from the big slugs by doing leapfrog and dropkick spots 15 years ago. They had a big brawl backstage with the Wolfpack showing up in a Humvee limo and started attacking everyone in sight. Bagwell was even involved physically. There were a million cops around who couldn't break up anything. Remind me never to vacation in Colombia with a police force that incompetent. Sting fought backstage with Bret Hart. Eventually they were in the parking lot and Sting used a forklift to pick up, turn over and smash Hogan's limo, and Nash, Luger and Connon smashed out the headlights and windows with sledgehammers. Where were the cops while this was going on? Right there watching. Sting was looking for a knife, theoretically to slash the tires and not a wrestler's throat, but nobody had one, so he let the air out of the tires instead. It was a real wild scene, but it looked sloppy and totally unplanned as compared with the WWF chaos from the previous week. Damien was wrestling Hector Garza when Eddie Guerrero showed up. The match ended for no reason and Eddie told them how Bischoff doesn't take care of people who aren't kissing the same ass Hogan's that he's kissing, and said while this building was sold out how the Mexicans are sleeping 4 to a hotel room and riding 7 guys in a rental car while the other guys get limos. He said that Hogan's couldn't lace either of their boots. This segment was dying until the coup de grace. He offered them NWO replica t-shirts, called LWO, Latin World Order, colored like the Mexican flag. The whole place groaned. Getting all these guys who have been portrayed forever as the lowest rung of jobbers in a group will mean nothing. But naming them LWO was the dumbest idea imaginable. Wait, this is WCW. So to get the idea that these guys now mean something, Kidman pinned Psychosis in 10:40 with a shooting star press to keep the Cruiser title. Great TV match. Easily the best match on either show, even with Larry Zbyszko doing his best to kill every one of Psychosis' moves. I wonder if when Argentina Rocca or Satoru Sayama or Dynamite Kid or Jushin Liger were first getting over as the revolutionary wrestlers of their day, that one of the announcers were saying how stupid the new moves are and going on and on about how they aren't going to have long careers. As bad as Ed Whalen was, Even he wasn't that ignorant about what his job is, although he was plenty ignorant. While there is truth in the latter statement about crazy things shortening a career, it isn't as if the pioneers of this style like Lismark Sr. and Pero Aguayo and Gran Hamada all didn't last one hell of a lot longer in the ring than people like Larry Zbyszko, and the other unfortunate reality is that without those moves, these guys are all too small to make it in pro wrestling doing the basics of working old American style, so maybe they should be praised for risking their bodies to create an opening for themselves. They aired a taped Warrior interview. Warrior was there, but after the problems the previous week, they didn't dare put him before a live crowd so everyone could see him get booed out of the place. Even taped and pre-produced, his interview still sucked, and boy did he look old in the close-ups. Scott Steiner did a pre-produced interview and this was a lot better than his live ones. As sick as this sounds, it was the best interview on the show. Then Steiner came out with Bagwell. This thing was going to die, but it was saved by Judy Bagwell, who was over huge with the crowd as she was yelling at Marcus and grabbing him by the ear and taking him to the back. Scott and Bryan Adams then attacked Rick to lead to Rick coming back and pinning Adams with a bulldog off the top in 5:36 of a bad match. Hogan did an interview. He never once even acknowledged the fact his limo was destroyed, thereby ruining the long-term effects of that angle. He basically obsessed about how history will view him and challenged Warrior, who never showed. Page beat Kanyon via DQ in 7:19 of a real good match. Raven gave Page a diamond cutter, but Page kicked out of Kanyon's pin. Match was very well put together and well executed. Raven interfered for the DQ. Geez, Page is getting a title match on pay-per-view. Can't he at least beat Kanyon clean? Goldberg made the save and he jackhammered Lodi while Page gave the cutter to Kanyon, which allowed them each to do their move and Raven to escape unscathed. Goldberg and Page did a stare down after the match until they were pulled apart. Disciple beat Lenny Lane with a stunner. Without 10A, the best they could do was one of those Vince McMahon what a move descriptions. In 2:05. Crowd died. He got on the mic and said he'd never carry Hogan's bags again, to get over as a face. Everyone booed him. How long before they take the hint and give this guy the hook? Hogan then ran around backstage looking for his estranged disciple. He wound up in his dressing room and saw Warrior in the mirror. Hogan started talking to Warrior. Now we all saw Warrior in the mirror as well, even though it was supposed to be Hogan's dream. Bischoff couldn't see him and thought Hogan was going nuts. Then Warrior disappeared, yet Hogan still saw him and Bischoff thought he was going even nuttier. Throughout the show, Mike Tenay and a camera crew were chasing down Nash, Connon and Luger in their search for Hall as a local tavern. They went to two places, one of which was deserted, another of which had maybe 15 people at. It's like, they're big stars. Don't they hang out in places that have at least one personally who even vaguely resembles a pretty girl? Finally they found Hall in a third place. Without any provocation, Nash attacked Hall and was pounding him on the pool table and took him into the bathroom and closed the door. Was that scary or what? When they let Tenay in, Hall was asleep over the toilet. Boy, after seeing that for 20 seconds it really builds up anticipation to see them do a bar fight on the next pay-per-view. Bischoff started doing a promo on Flair. Arn Anderson came out with 10-year-old Reed Flair, who was nervous and Arn had to carry him through. He started by saying Mean Gene, which would have been cute had Mean Gene been there, but since he wasn't, well, he did get a pop saying he was there to take care of his dad's light work. Reed took Bischoff down twice, which the crowd really didn't get into until Anderson started laughing at Bischoff for it. This reminded me too much of seeing Chris Von Erich and Gino Hernandez angle in 1985, and you know how that story ends. Bischoff got on the cell phone and called Flair and they acted as if Beth was yelling at him. Finally Flair showed up, the NWO surrounded the place, but the Horsemen cleaned house. Bischoff slid out and Rick and Reed strutted in the ring together. Flair's oldest son David was also in the ring by this point with the rest of the Horsemen. The show ended with Sting vs. Hart. The entire match took place backstage, which infuriated the crowd to no end as they don't have the giant screens in the building like Titan does when they do a lot of the show backstage or on location. It was a very good believable brawl, particularly some very good selling by Hart, although again didn't seem that well planned out as they were looking for things to do to stretch time. The worst part was when Sting finally got the Scorpion on Hart and Zbyszko started claiming it wasn't being applied properly, so he and Schiavone had this discussion over the finer points of the Scorpion while Hart was selling like this was the end of his career. Finally it was broken up and the show ended. Goldberg destroyed Disco Inferno quickly in a dark match. While the merchandise is down and pay-per-view is falling, the advances for house shows continue to be great. Tickets went on sale over the weekend for the November 2nd Nitro in Fort Lauderdale, and the first day they sold 12,000 tickets out of 14,000 put on sale for $283,000. People magazine interviewed Goldberg for a story that should run very soon, and he'll also appear with Regis and Kathy Lee in November. The main event on the September 27th show in Erie, Pennsylvania wound up as Hall vs. Nash, and it barely took place as Nash refused to wrestle Hall while he was drunk and walked off for the core. Bet the fans there love that creativity or creative way of nobody taking any bumps on a house show. It appears the Hall vs. Nash bar fight match will take place at Havoc. Think of all the training that poor Dale Torborg had to go through for the past few years at the power plant just to become the member of a pit crew every weekend. A lot more has been made about the Vince McMahon/Kevin Nash meeting than there really is, although I guess it makes for great speculation. According to different people who were there, Nash was coming off a plane and bumped into Shane McMahon, who mentioned to him that his dad was at another gate. Nash went to the gate, they talked, and basically Nash said to Vince to save me a spot for 29 months from now when his contract runs out. Basically it was exactly as it was reported on the WWF website. The Bret Hart movie is scheduled to air on either December 18th or December 20th. It will air about 5 weeks earlier in Canada. There is going to be a Canadian preview screening of the movie on November 10th in Toronto, which is 1 year plus 1 day of last year's Survivor Series. There will also be an American grand opening screening in mid-December in Los Angeles. They will be running another show at the Georgia Dome on January 4th and will be doing Super Brawl on the West Coast again in late February, probably at the Oakland Arena. A correction from last issue. Apparently it wasn't Terry Taylor that worked with Steve McMichael on the house show in Utica, New York. It was Barry Darsow trying out a golfer gimmick. QVC, another Time Warner network, will be doing a WCW segment with Nash and Goldberg 8 p.m. Eastern on October 13th, similar to the very successful WWF deal a few weeks back on Home Shopping Network. One of the reasons WCW has won the final quarter every Monday of late is because of the great job Tony Schiavone has been doing in building up the importance of the Nitro main events throughout the show. The streak where Arn Anderson was in the highest-rated quarter hour of the show ended at 6. Barry Windham was backstage at Nitro in Columbia. The tape Thunder on October 1st drew a 3.59 rating and 5.7 share, which is basically an average show, once again showing that being on tape has no effect on the ratings. WCW Saturday Night on October 3rd did a 2.1. House shows for the week were October 2nd in Florence, South Carolina drew 4,312, paying $87,355. October 3rd in Charleston, South Carolina drew 5,572, paying $106,576, and October 4th in Savannah, Georgia drew 5,554, paying $94,860. We don't have the merchandise in at press time for Nitro in Columbia, but for the 3 weekend house shows it was $88,779 or $5.75 per night, so you can see that arm of revenue is declining greatly of late. WCW Saturday Night was taped on October 6th in Gainesville, Georgia before a sellout 1,800. There was chaos backstage as several wrestlers who were supposed to work, including most of the Mexicans, Benoit and Giant, all no-showed. The entire Mexican contingent was scheduled to sign 3-year contracts that afternoon and then get drug tested. We don't know what happened, except that Conan and Psicosis were the only ones who arrived, and Psicosis didn't even work. One of Ultimo Dragon's students from Naucalpan was brought in for a tryout and given the ring name Tampong in someone's idea of a practical joke. They also gave a tryout to Brett Hamner, another juiced-up power plant guy, who didn't show much. The show for October 10th was headlined by Bulldog Kerr Alex Wright in 1 minute. For the second week, they did an angle after Kidman kept the cruiser belt beating Lenny Lane, that Disco came out and weighed himself at 215 to prove he was a cruiserweight. Scott Steiner, who arrived late for the show and was yelled at, then yelled over the PA at the crowd, "Blow me." Darsow did his Payne Stewart gimmick and was supposed to wrestle Hamner, and blew it off saying that he had an early tea time and left. Jericho kept the TV title going to a draw with David Finlay. Hall and Giant were scheduled to defend the tag titles against Disorderly Conduct, but since Giant no-showed, Hall came out and did a promo saying that since Nash was the size of 2 guys, he told Giant to stay home, and while still acting totally loaded, beat Conduct in a handicap match. Finale saw a rematch with Bulldog and Wright going at Kerr, this time in 2 minutes. It was supposed to go longer and maybe have a different finish, but get this. They ran out of tape and just signaled for the guys to go home. WWF. Vader, Leon White, will be finishing up at the end of the month as both sides have agreed to a contract release which will allow him to work anywhere in the world except WCW. It appears it was a mutual deal. Vader has from the start always had a mixed political situation, as some in the office were high on him and others didn't see anything in him. Over the past 2.5 years he's had some great showings and some not so great ones, and due to all the bumps he takes at his size and his age and past problems with his knees, back and shoulder, he's been hurt a lot. The office got on him about dropping weight and his push pretty much stalled because they wanted him under 350. Basically, when he missed the shows a few weekends back due to blood pressure problems and a potassium imbalance from crash dieting, even his supporters had given up and he's been jobbed out ever since. He at the same time requested a lighter schedule and they came to a mutual agreement it was time for him to leave. Most likely he'll wind up in Japan, but there are political problems there. The natural fit is New Japan, where from 1987 to 1994, he was the top foreign drawing card and is basically a legend in that world. However, with the WCW connection with New Japan booking talent and Bischoff's hatred of Vader, he may pressure the company into not using him. An even better fit would be for UFO, which desperately needs marquee talent, and he wouldn't have to work long tours and just fly in for big shows and then be a key part of the eventual feud with New Japan, but again, that's in reality New Japan and the same problem may exist. All Japan could use him, but there's the problem of his surviving a full-time gig with that physical of a style for those 3-week tours. Ray Traylor has signed and should debut in about a month as the Big Boss Man once again, probably as a heel enforcer for McMahon. Traylor, 36, is said to be down to 290 pounds, he's wrestled most of his career at between 340 and 390. He's recuperating from back surgery which as recently as 2 months ago he was fearing would be career-ending, but received a clean bill from his doctor to return to the ring. The jury is out on this one as it's been years since he's been a top name, but at one point he was a great worker for a guy of his size, and while he's older, there are plenty of guys who have had a lot of great years in the ring that are quite a bit older. The October 18th Chicago pay-per-view show is sold out, which makes 5 straight sellouts at the Rosemont Horizon. Even more impressive is that WCW has already sold out the United Center, which would be its 4th or 5th straight sellout in that building, for a show 6 days earlier, making Chicago unquestionably the hottest wrestling city in the country. Remember all those morons who thought those exposes in the Chicago Sun-Times in the summer of 1997 would kill the business in Chicago, and since then there hasn't been an empty seat for either group in 16 months. What is definite on the show is Undertaker vs. Kane with Austin as ref, Shamrock vs. Mankind, Rock vs. Mark Henry, and some sort of a gimmick match with X-Pac vs. D'Lo Brown and Goldust vs. Val Venus. The original plan was to put Southern Justice against New Age Outlaws for the tag title, but with Mark Canterbury injured, it either may be Dennis Knight and Jeff Jarrett as they've done in the house shows, or switching it to 2 singles matches. They had talked of Jarrett vs. Al Snow or Snow vs. Scorpio. It appears at this point that Jacqueline vs. Sable for the women's title will be a Raw match rather than a pay-per-view match. Preliminary indications are that the Breakdown pay-per-view did in 0.86 buy rate, which would be about 300,000 buys or a $3.86 million gross, which isn't bad for a show with an unimpressive lineup going in. The Raw taping on September 29th in East Lansing, Michigan drew 9,846, paying $197,566. In a tryout match, Andrew Martin beat Steve Boz. For the Heat show that aired on October 5th, Road Dogg came out with a women's blow-up doll dressed like Billy Gunn, who wasn't at the taping. McMahon was doing a series of interviews from his hospital bed. X-Pac beat a disinterested Owen Hart. Golga and Kurgan beat Headbangers when Insane Clown Posse interfered. Shuichi Funaki beat Matt Hardy. DOA beat Ken Shamrock and Mankind when Shamrock clocked Mankind with a chair and he was pinned. Jarrett NC Rock when Southern Justice attacked Rock. Austin saved him, stunning everyone, and Rock and Austin had to stare down until they were pulled apart. Raw opened with Brown regaining the European strap from X-Pac in 5:16 with a frog splash when Henry interfered. Bangers challenged ICP and basically destroyed them. ICP took good bumps for non-wrestlers, although both have done a lot of indie wrestling around Michigan. They took some hard chairs before oddities broke it up. Bangers got a lot of cheers but also a fair share of boos. McMahon was in the hospital when the nurse said there was a big visitor. McMahon freaked out thinking it was Austin, but it was Mankind giving his chocolate. McMahon was totally overacting, let alone the believability of a guy hooked up with all those tubes because they broke their ankle. Mankind said he brought a guest and McMahon freaked again thinking it was Austin. He said he was giving him some female companionship, but instead it was a rather large woman dressed in a clown making a dog out of a balloon. This segment was awesome. Sable came out and high-fived Terry Power and challenged Jacqueline for the belt. Mero beat Vader when Jacqueline distracted Vader and Mero hit him with a low blow and shooting star in 413. After the match, Mero said Sable couldn't satisfy him, she slapped him. Jacqueline jumped her and cut off some of her extensions. Steven Regal drank orange juice. These segments are so campy they're almost good. Edge was supposed to wrestle Owen. Owen did 2 interviews in the building, and they heavily edited both of them to where he basically walked out and said nothing but it's over. What was edited out, which means it's been changed, is him first saying he'd never be back and later saying fans would never see him in the WWF again. The plan seems to be to bring him back for Survivor Series in a new role. Hart does have a groin injury, but he's been working on it, and this is just an angle and not an injury cover. Shamrock beat Kane when Undertaker shoved the ropes, and Kane crotched himself. Val beat Gangrel. Christian Cage is simply known as Christian, and he came to ringside with Gangrel. He's supposed to be Edge's brother but under the spell on Gangrel. The crowd loved Venus but totally died when he started wrestling, and they didn't care about either guy at that point. Terry Runnels was with Venus, and the only crowd reactions to the match were when, off camera, she teased she was going to take her top off. Edge came out to recapture his brother, sort of like Hogan with Ed Leslie I guess, and Gangrel gave him the implant DDT on the floor and both guys stomped on him. Venus got a letter and gold glitter fell from the sky, and Goldust said he'd return for next week's Raw at Nassau Coliseum. Snow beat Jarrett via DQ when Slaughter shook the ropes for a lame DQ. Road Dogg pinned Henry when X-Pac interfered. Henry is now suing China for sexual harassment. Austin, dressed as a doctor, beat up Vince in the hospital room. It was a comedy bit with Vince getting beaten up and his underwear showing. Finally, Taker pinned Rock in a slightly better than average match. Kane came out and scared away Henry and D-Lo, leading to Rock firing them. After the match, Ross stated that only in the WWF are you going to see action like that. Unfortunately, he said that ending a night where WCW had 3 matches that were better. For Heat on October 11th, Jacqueline kept the title beating Starla Sexton. Shamrock beat Snow with the ankle lock, but refused to release it after the bell and the decision was reversed. Scorpio did a run-in, but he got beat up as well until Mankind made the save. Kaientai beat Hardys and Too Much when the latter 2 teams couldn't get along. Road Dogg beat Jarrett via DQ for a guitar shot. Rock fired the Nation and challenged Henry to a match on the pay-per-view. Edge beat Vader, and finally Austin pinned Brown after a stunner. Rock attacked Austin after the match, but also attacked Brown and Henry. Jim Cornette is now the regular co-host on Heat with Shane McMahon. Injury update. Helmsley is staying 6 days a week in Birmingham after his arthroscopic knee surgery, working on rehabilitation. The surgery procedure he went was somewhat experimental, and there is a decent chance he may need full-blown reconstructive surgery if this doesn't rehab well, in which case he'd be out of action probably until next spring. They are hopeful this rehab goes well and he'll be back for Survivor Series, but that's just a fingers crossed target date. Canterbury re-injured the neck he broke last year against the Road Warriors and is suffering numbness and stingers. He is undergoing 2 weeks of traction before anything further will be determined. Savio Vega will be out at least another 3 months due to neck and spine problems. Animal is scheduled to return at TV on October 12th after knee surgery, or perhaps start on the road on October 8th. Godfather is also expected back at the next TV. Steve Blackman returned this past week at the house shows but isn't any more than 60%. Rolling Stone is doing an article on Austin. Playboy is preparing a wrestling article combined with a photo spread of Sable. Don't know anything regarding Jim Carrey appearing on Raw, but it doesn't appear anything is imminent. I think Carrey will probably do it to promote the movie, and if he does, he'll be Carrey pretending to be Kaufman and insist on being called Andy, as was the case when he was filming the movie, on TV if he appears. Speaking of the movie Man on the Moon, Lance Russell played himself as the ring announcer for the wrestling matches. Jim Ross didn't play Dave Brown, but simply played an unnamed pro wrestling announcer, as Brown wasn't at the Mid-South Coliseum for the famous matches. Newsweek ran a short item on the Lawler/Carey angle, not only treating it as if it was a shoot, but treating Lawler's angle with Kaufman as if it was a shoot as well, claiming in 1982 Lawler choked Kaufman and left him with 4 compressed vertebrae. USA has renewed Heat for 2 more seasons. Don't believe there are any plans to increase the show to 2 hours as has been rumored. The hopes are for Michaels to be able to work Royal Rumble, if not December, to be able to have time to shoot and put together a major angle involving him for Mania. Christopher Daniels will be invited to the next WWF training camp, which means he'll probably be at the NWA 50th anniversary show in the Battle Royal. Rock was signed to a long-term contract extension. If the Outlaws are broken up, Billy Gunn will be given a major singles hill push. Expect Kurt Angle to debut with a major push early in 1999. When Motley Crue appears on the October 26th Raw, taped October 20th in Madison, Wisconsin, they'll play 2 songs during the show. Aaron O'Grady, Mick Tierney, Vic Grimes, Matt Bloom and Sean Stasiak will all be sent to Memphis to work as regulars there as part of their developmental contracts, probably before the end of this month. Kickboxing legend Joe Louis has contacted WWF about getting involved, but there doesn't appear to be interest. House shows this past week saw September 30th in Grand Rapids, Michigan draw 6,501 paying $143,446. October 1st in Hampton, Virginia drew 8,852 paying $159,685. October 2nd in Richmond, Virginia drew a sellout 10,596 paying $231,611. October 3rd in Fayetteville, North Carolina drew a sellout 10,279 paying $186,798 and October 4th at the Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey drew 14,017 paying $322,971. Merchandise for the week was $407,108 or $8.23 per head. The house shows in midweek were headlined by 3-way cage matches where Rock beat Mankind and Kane. Starting in Richmond, they turned into 4 ways with Gerald Briscoe as ref and Austin won over Undertaker, Mankind, and Kane. After the October 18th pay-per-view, the house show mains will remain as the 4 ways except Rock will replace Mankind in the top echelon. The original plan for Breakdown in the number 1 contenders 3-way was for Mankind to win by taking another insane bump and set up another title run with Undertaker and tags with Austin and Mankind versus Taker and Kane, but with Rock getting over so big, they changed the finish. At the shows, Outlaws teased Dissension beating Jarrett and Knight. They had X-Pac regaining the European belt from Brown until Patterson came out to reverse the decision. In Richmond in the 4-way, Austin threw Briscoe, who wouldn't count as he had Kane beat, out of the ring. Earl Hebner ran in and counted. Patterson and Briscoe attacked Earl but Austin gave them both stunners. Earl and Dave Hebner then put the boots to Patterson and Briscoe and the show ended with Austin and the Hebners all chugging a beer a la Sandman in mid-ring. At the East Rutherford show, the Brown vs. X-Pac match didn't take place because X-Pac had a bruised hip, so they did an angle and didn't have the match. X-Pac is expected to be back in action this coming weekend. What's scary is the bone-crunching buddy of Michaels looks more like Vic Grimes than Michaels, and I don't think there are any 2 people in this world who look any more different than Grimes and Michaels. The episode of Pacific Blue that Sable appears will be on October 11th, and it'll probably do a strong rating which they'll credit to Mario Lopez. In the ads, Sable only has one line which is, "I'm so hot I want to take my clothes off." For this coming weekend, Pittsburgh, Cleveland and Hershey should all be either close to or complete sellouts while Nassau at press time had only a few tickets left so the sellout was a formality. Weekend ratings saw Live Wire do a 1.7, Superstars a 1.7 and Heat a 3.84 and 6.3 share. The Reader's Pages. WWF. I'm totally disgusted at the match on Raw between Jacqueline and Sable. How the hell can Vince McMahon allow such a blatant act of sexual exploitation on his television show? And to show an instant replay of Jacqueline's exposed breast? Have they crossed the line of decency? What makes the situation even more disgusting was that it was put on what up to that point was in my opinion the best television wrestling show in years. This has got to stop soon because when wrestling goes into decline, incidents like this may cause stations to put wrestling programming on at 4 a.m. Robert Silva Jr. Bronx, New York. I would like to see any group, blacks, whites, Germans, Japanese, gays, Arabs, Jews, etc., take shit just to make a buck for a wrestling promoter. Wrestling can bend minds. It can just as easily bend minds in a good direction as it can in the direction of evil. What do the WCW and WWF tell 8-year-old boys watching their television with their portrayals of women, especially with China on her knees? The difference is my middle-aged buddies at work just talk. The kids are still learning and that is not good. The Maine legislature passed a gay rights law in 1997 only to have it overturned by a vote of the people. I've studied homosexuality for some time now, particularly because I was assaulted twice in my younger years by homosexual men and because of Bill Clinton's attempt to make the armed forces accept gays. Based on what I've learned, at least 8% of the world's population is gay. I suspect this has been true since the dawn of time, hence it is part of the plan of which God/nature has dumped on us. All inherent qualities which come with birth are natural. There is some debate as to whether homosexuals are born that way, but after years of observation, I'm convinced many are. I believe they have no choice. I believe nature made that choice for them. King Ripper Collins could still tear up an arena today, just as could a Bobo Brazil Coco Butt. It's probably better that both are a part of wrestling's past. Some other angles, like a goose-stepping Waldo von Erich, are also things of the past. Unfortunately, Vince McMahon hasn't realized this with his Japanese caricatures. World War II ended 53 years ago. I don't like the Kaientai scripts and I don't like the sexually orientated material, especially when it advocates violence against women. Bottom line through all this philosophical crap is that wrestling can follow, or lead. They typically aim at the LCD, lowest common denominator. In my workplace, the people who are totally hooked on wrestling are the janitors and the kids, who then convince mom and dad to pay the bucks to put their little fannies in the seats. The WWF does not offend me and I have met and like Vince McMahon and Howard Finkel. I like their sleazier entertainment and my wife enjoys the new style compared to the 1983 style. My youngest son is 19. He was mildly amused by Mr. Yamaguchi-san's choppy your PP line. My sister, however, whose 3 kids range from 9 through 13 was not amused. She said that her youngest daughter, in a $2,500 a year tuition Catholic grade school, had a friend bringing into class photos of Sable. She is believing this is how real women need to look. The WWF is teaching her that unless she has a chest like Sable, Chyna or Jacqueline and flashes it to the boys on demand, she won't attract attention from boys. People like the WWF and a lot of people still like Bill Clinton, although the cigar thing really turned off a lot of female voters. Based on your stats, the kids will bankroll the WWF now, and later as teenagers. The McMahons have always had a knack for bringing out the Animal House side of people. Michael Abbey. Fairfield, Maine. Anderson/Flair. I was happy, but certainly not surprised, that you included some well-earned praise for Arn Anderson for his dynamic contributions to the angle that reintroduced the Four Horsemen on the September 14th Nitro. The ability to simply speak coherently is so foreign to so many of today's top wrestling stars that is just amazing. Unless someone has a catchphrase or two to fall back on when their brain starts to cramp up, the interviewer, when there is one, or someone in the front row might as well just throw a life preserver into the ring. Bryan Adams, Scott Steiner, Lex Luger, Jim Hellwig and Jacqueline couldn't formulate a coherent sentence together if they were spotted both the subject and the predicate. By melding wrestling shtick, history and the right amount of personal emotion, Anderson made the September 14th show even more memorable than it would have been without it. It was the segment of a lifetime. The mark of a true pro in any business is the ability to rise to the occasion in the clutch, when all the lights are on, and live up to, and possibly exceed, all expectations of performance and not being afraid to show a little emotion when your efforts are being recognized by people who just want to say thanks. Thanks to Arn Anderson for being such a pro and thanks to Ric Flair for being the same. Sean Flanagan. Los Angeles, California. Was it just me, or was the return of Ric Flair more compelling than many of today's actual matches? The first time I saw it, I was near tears. When I watched it again, I was in tears. Flair is a once-in-a-lifetime performer and I hope there will be a place in the business for him as long as he wants to be a part of it. Hulk Hogan can do all the political maneuvering he wants. He'll never get the respect and long-term devotion from fans that Flair has. After most of today's so-called superstars are long forgotten, people will still talk about Flair. John Merton. Chicago, Illinois. Response from Dave Meltzer. The return of Flair wasn't more compelling than many of today's matches. It was more compelling than all of today's matches. Pimpinella Escarlata. I know that in about 5 weeks you're going to open up the 1998 Wrestling Observer Newsletter Annual Awards. It's a pity there isn't some sort of honorable mention award for Pimpinella Escarlata. There aren't 50 fans in the United States who really understand what he's done over the last 3 years. Best heel. Most underrated? I guess, considering his work rate and his drawing power, he deserves consideration for Wrestler of the Year, though that has been the case for the past 2 years. And what about Cesar Johnson? A while back it was estimated in Super Luchas that he is drawing about 10,000 fans to his shows every Monday night at the Plaza de Toros in Nuevo Laredo. If that's so, and considering he runs occasional holiday and super shows, this one promoter running just one arena is drawing between 500,000 and 600,000 fans per year. That's more than any full-time promotion in the world except EMLL, which due to the sheer number of shows are the #1 promotion in the world when it comes to ticket sales by a large margin. WCW, WWF, and maybe New Japan, depending how much New Japan inflates their numbers. I'm excluding AAA because I don't get regular enough information, but I suspect they may draw about 1 million fans per year, but I don't have enough info to say that for sure. In Johnson's favor for best promoter is that he has one arena, runs one show a week, has far less talent quality-wise than EMNLL, New Japan, WWF or WCW, is working with a terrible economy, and has had the same guys on top for 2 to 3 years, relying largely on La Parca and Pimpinela as his top draws, and runs an outdoor building which can be susceptible to bad weather, and the entire metropolitan area of Nuevo Laredo and Laredo is only about 1 million people max. Could any other promoter do so well under these conditions? And 1998 hasn't been any different than 1997 or 1996. But for a name nobody knows, he may be the best promoter in the business right now. Steve Dr. Lucha Sims. Chula Vista, California. Hall of Fame. A wrestling Hall of Fame without Hans Schmidt is as complete as a baseball Hall of Fame without Pete Rose. Schmidt headlined major markets such as New York, Chicago and Buffalo for nearly 2 decades, early 50s to late 60s. He had mainstream attention in an Esquire magazine article in the 50s and was mentioned in Jack Brickhouse's book. When I ask people who watched wrestling on network TV in the 50s about who they remember, the names they typically say are Vern Gagne, Gorgeous George, Antonino Rocca, and Schmidt. Perhaps he is being neglected because he doesn't participate in the Cauliflower Alley Club or reunion circuits. Schmidt should be a given in any serious attempt to assemble a wrestling Hall of Fame. Dr. Bob Bryla. Utica, New York. Response from Dave Meltzer: 2 years ago when I started the project, I brought the name of Hans Schmidt up to people who were major fans in that era and wrestlers from that era, mainly because of the stories of how much of the gate Jim Barnett used to charge local promoters for Schmidt during that heyday of wrestling on television, which meant at his peak he was a hell of a draw. All I can say is the response was unanimous that while he had a run as a draw, he didn't belong, and much of the response was pretty strong in that view, and that he was a poor worker even by the standards of his time, who had a run after World War II doing the Nazi gimmick, but aside from having a good gimmick for his time, nobody seemed impressed by him. I've seen tapes of him, but aside from a few real standouts like Rogers, Thez and O'Connor, most of the 50s guys viewed today aren't impressive. If you ask today's fans in 20 years about the decade of the 90s in wrestling, a lot of people will mention names like Sting, Luger and Ultimate Warrior right behind Hogan, but none would even be considered for a Hall of Fame inductee. The Moon, Lance Russell, played himself as the ring announcer for the wrestling matches. Jim Ross didn't play Dave Brown, but simply played an unnamed pro wrestling announcer, as Brown wasn't at the Mid-South Coliseum for the famous matches. Newsweek ran a short item on the Lawler/Carey angle, not only treating it as if it was a shoot, but treating Lawler's angle with Kaufman as if it was a shoot as well, claiming in 1982 Lawler choked Kaufman and left him with 4 compressed vertebrae. USA has renewed Heat for 2 more seasons. Don't believe there are any plans to increase the show to 2 hours as has been rumored. The hopes are for Michaels to be able to work Royal Rumble, if not December, to be able to have time to shoot and put together a major angle involving him for Mania. Christopher Daniels will be invited to the next WWF training camp, which means he'll probably be at the NWA 50th anniversary show in the Battle Royal. Rock was signed to a long-term contract extension. If the Outlaws are broken up, Billy Gunn will be given a major singles hill push. Expect Kurt Angle to debut with a major push early in 1999. When Motley Crue appears on the October 26th Raw, taped October 20th in Madison, Wisconsin, they'll play 2 songs during the show. Aaron O'Grady, Mick Tierney, Vic Grimes, Matt Bloom and Sean Stasiak will all be sent to Memphis to work as regulars there as part of their developmental contracts, probably before the end of this month. Kickboxing legend Joe Louis has contacted WWF about getting involved, but there doesn't appear to be interest. House shows this past week saw September 30th in Grand Rapids, Michigan draw 6,501 paying $143,446. October 1st in Hampton, Virginia drew 8,852 paying $159,685. October 2nd in Richmond, Virginia drew a sellout 10,596 paying $231,611. October 3rd in Fayetteville, North Carolina drew a sellout 10,279 paying $186,798, and October 4th at the Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey drew 14,017 paying $322,971. Merchandise for the week was $407,108 or $8.23 per head. The house shows in midweek were headlined by 3-way cage matches where Rock beat Mankind and Kane. Starting in Richmond, they turned into 4 ways with Gerald Briscoe as ref, and Austin won over Undertaker, Mankind, and Kane. After the October 18th pay-per-view, The house show mains will remain as the four ways, except Rock will replace Mankind in the top echelon. The original plan for Breakdown in the number one contenders three-way was for Mankind to win by taking another insane bump and set up another title run with Undertaker and tags with Austin and Mankind versus Taker and Kane, but with Rock getting over so big, they changed the finish. At the shows, Outlaws teased Dissension beating Jarrett and Knight. They had X-Pac regaining the European belt from Brown until Patterson came out to reverse the decision. In Richmond in the four-way, Austin threw Briscoe, who wouldn't count as he had Kane beat, out of the ring. Earl Hebner ran in and counted. Patterson and Briscoe attacked Earl, but Austin gave them both stunners. Earl and Dave Hebner then put the boots to Patterson and Briscoe, and the show ended with Austin and the Hebners all chugging a beer a la Sandman in mid-ring. At the East Rutherford show, the Brown vs. X-Pac match didn't take place because X-Pac had a bruised hip, so they did an angle and didn't have the match. X-Pac is expected to be back in action this coming weekend. What's scary is the bone-crunching buddy of Michaels looks more like Vic Grimes than Michaels, and I don't think there are any two people in this world who look any more different than Grimes and Michaels. The episode of Pacific Blue that Sable appears will be on October 11th, and it'll probably do a strong rating, which they'll credit to Mario Lopez. In the ads, Sable only has one line, which is, "I'm so hot I want to take my clothes off." For this coming weekend, Pittsburgh, Cleveland and Hershey should all be either close to or complete sellouts, while Nassau at press time had only a few tickets left, so the sellout was a formality. Weekend ratings saw Live Wire do a 1.7, Superstars a 1.7, and Heat a 3.84.